Welcome to the 13th podcast from the Merseyside Pensioners Association. It's not just for pensioners, but for everyone. In this programme, recorded on the 17th of September 2020, we will be covering UK activists who are protesting against Israeli government war crimes. We ask, why has the proposed electronic warfare arms fair in Liverpool been cancelled? We speak to legendary peace campaigner Bruce Kent about arms fairs and the threat of nuclear war.
They occupy Palestine! They occupy Palestine!
You were listening there to the voices of brave young activists for peace on the roof of an arms manufacturer in Lichfield. Palestine Action is a network of people opposing UK companies and institutions that are complicit in upholding and profiting from Israel's war crimes in Palestine. They are an anti-racist network which aims to end Israeli government apartheid and the occupation of Palestine. The Merseyside Pensioners Association has always opposed the oppression of the Palestinian people. On Tuesday, Palestine Action activists occupied Elbit Systems in Shenstone, owned by Israeli arms dealers. Protesters climbed the roof and the occupation is now in its third day. Palestine Action exposes the role of companies such as Elbit Systems, Israel's biggest arms manufacturer, which supplied the majority of drones used to kill 2,000 Palestinians in Gaza in 2014. They've also highlighted the role of JCB, whose bulldozers are routinely used to destroy Palestinian homes on a daily basis. Their movement is rapidly gaining momentum and support, and they are confident that now is the time they can achieve real change. Red paint, representing the blood of Palestinians, has been poured down the facade of the factory, and Palestinian flags fly from the roof.
They occupy Palestine! We occupy them! They occupy Palestine!
Yesterday I spoke to Huda Amori, one of the activists, while she was on the roof of the factory. Huda, thanks for talking to the MPA. Can you tell me why you've climbed on the roof of the factory?
We're on the roof to protest against Elbit Systems and to protest against UK complicity with Israeli apartheid. The UK has been complicit in the colonisation of Palestine for over 100 years, and to this day they continue to profit, facilitate and sustain Israel's apartheid regime. They're literally allowing companies which market their weapons as tested on Palestinians to operate here in the UK. We are tired of petitions, writing to MPs. We know that the government is fully aware of Israel's apartheid regime and is trying to ignore us and instead suppress activists who are trying to speak out for Palestinian human rights. And we say enough is enough. It's time to take direct action and to force them to listen to us and to force these factories shut down.
Huda, what exactly does the factory make?
So the factory today that we're on is UAV Engines, and it's Elbit subsidiary, and they manufacture the engines for the drones, which they have used in Gaza. They provide 85% of Israel's military drone fleet, and these drones were used in the attack in Gaza in 2014, when Israel killed over 2,200 Palestinians and 500 children in just 50 days. And they continue to use these drones to surveil Palestinians. They're also using these drones. They've just recently won the contract to surveil the border of the UK to try and spy and stop migrants and refugees who are seeking safety from state-sponsored wars to enter this country.
How long have you been on the roof?
So we've been here since Monday morning. We're now on our third day. and we plan to stay here as long as physically possible until we're forcibly removed. And we plan to continue to escalate our actions until all of these Elbit sites in the country are shut down for good.
Huda, have you got enough food and water with you?
Our food supplies are depleting, and unfortunately, the police, to no surprise, have denied us food that people have brought. So many supporters have come and tried to bring us food. They're not allowing them to come near to the site. One person did manage to come near to the site, and they confiscated the food package. They've told protesters that they are handing us the food. It's a complete lie. They're denying us the food, and they've also trying to use water as a bargaining chip to get us off the roof. We've been advised by our lawyers that this is completely illegal. We've also seen the police push protesters off bikes for simply raising their fists and showing support for our protests. We've seen them stop cars yesterday who are beefing in support of us, and stop and pull them over. In some cases, searching the cars of people, and these are just ordinary people in this community who sympathise with what's going on in Palestine, who don't want a company like Elbit Systems, who are facilitating and committing war crimes, to be in their community, and they're being pulled over and harassed by the police just simply for showing support for Palestine. And at the same time, when people have held racist abuse, they've done absolutely nothing. But this hasn't come too much surprise to us, because we know that the police are acting on behalf of the UK government, who have been complicit in the colonisation of Palestine for over 100 years and are trying to suppress our protests and suppress our voices, as they have done for decades now. And that's why we are taking direct action. Enough is enough. We're very privileged to be here in the UK, and it's unfortunately at the cost of many Palestinians that these businesses are running here. And that's why we have to take action and put ourselves on the line to stop this here, because this is where it starts.
I think what you're doing is inspirational. And on behalf of the MPA, I'm sending you our solidarity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. We appreciate your support and solidarity.
Palestine Action are calling on all of you who oppose racism and oppression not only to join their movement, but to donate to Palestine Action. Donations will be used to pay for costs associated with running their campaigns and actions. You can donate through their GoFundMe page. This is a story we will continue to follow. You can listen to all of the Merseyside Pensioners podcasts by going to the Merseyside Pensioners YouTube channel. There's also some films you can watch featuring the campaigning work of the MPA. You can also hear us each week on Liverpool Community Radio FM 106.7 or online. You can also find the MPA podcast on Spotify and Anchor.fm. The arms business has a devastating impact on human rights and security and damages economic development. Large-scale military procurement and arms exports only reinforce a militaristic approach to international problems. It was therefore no surprise that a proposed electronic warfare arms fair in Liverpool has provoked a public outcry. Later on we will be speaking to Bruce Kent about the arms business. But first let's hear from Mark Holt of Merseyside Stop the War. I asked Mark what he thought about the proposed arms fair to be held in Liverpool in a venue owned by Liverpool City Council.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, Liverpool Mayor Joe Anderson ought to be pretty careful about what he's doing here, allowing arms companies to rent out, what is it? Is it the Echo Arena that they're going to be renting out? And as far as I understand, the Echo Arena is owned, isn't it, by Liverpool City Council? It may be the case, in my opinion, that Anderson Mayor is doing here is going actually against Liverpool City Council policy, which is actually not to support the arms industry. And the reason why I say this is because we know in 2007, Liverpool City Council voted unanimously demanding that Merseyside pension fund, which it pays into, shed its investments in arms companies. And this was after a campaign, by the way, by Merseyside Stop the War Coalition, of which I was the chairperson then. We lobbied Liverpool City Council regarding its pension fund because part of it we knew was invested in the arms trade. We're talking here about Merseyside Pension Fund. It's got a pot of about £5 billion, and it represents the pensions monies of the workers of all 5 Merseyside local authorities and a number of universities in Liverpool. So in 2007, at that time, Liverpool City Council was run by the Liberal Democrats, and you wouldn't believe it, they weren't so bad on the issue of ethical investments. So we put forward some ideas to them, which they actually turned into a motion from the council calling on the pension fund, calling on Merseyside Pension Fund to disinvest from arms companies. And I was actually invited in there to address the council. And the motion was passed unanimously by everybody, by the Liberal Democrats. I don't know if there was any Tory councillors then, but there was definitely Labour and there was definitely Liberal Democrats, and they all voted in favour of it. And it was virtually, as far as I know, the first time in our country's history that a council had called on its pension fund to disinvest from arms companies. And as far as I know, there was only one other council in the whole country that had ever tried this, and I think it was Cornwall County Council in 2002. So what we'd done was pretty historic. And after that, I got quite excited, so I emailed every single councillor in Sefton. Then I emailed every single councillor in Knowsley and in St Helens. And over a period of a couple of months, similar council resolutions to what are being passed in Liverpool were adopted by those councils, by those very large local authorities. Now, in fairness to those councils, the motions weren't as clear-cut as the Liverpool resolution had been, but the wording was there. It's still called for disinvestment. And these were Labour and Liberal Democrat councils who had voted for it. So we were in a situation then in which basically 4 of the 5 Merseyside borough councils were calling on their pension fund to disinvest in the arms trade. And that left just one council, the council charged with the day-to-day management of the fund, which was Wirral Borough Council. So we lobbied them. I emailed almost all of their councillors, and I was invited to go and speak to them. We did a protest as well. We had hundreds of people outside of Wirral Borough Council calling on them to, vote with the other councils and divest in the arms trade. But what happened was, even after I'd spoken to them, they had the vote and they went and voted to keep investing as they had been. And their argument is that they had to continue investing in the arms trade. The argument they put forward was that they had legally to vote the way they did because of something called fiduciary duty. Now, this is what they argued. People who have argued that pension funds should not invest in arms companies, they always run up against this fiduciary duty argument time and time again. It's an almost legal narrative that says all monies held in trust by other people on behalf of other people has to be the subject to this duty. So fiduciary duty technically is about trust. It's about an idea that the person who holds or has fiduciary duty has a duty to act not in their own self-interest, but in the interest of the person or the people, in this case a pension fund, to act in the very best interest of it. The archetypal meaning has become to mean, and it only means, that despite any moral or ethical reasons, the fiduciary duty can only mean getting the very, very best return for investment. In other words, they have to make the best killing, and in this case, literally. However, I think that's a rather narrow interpretation of it. You see, many pensioners have had arguments with their own pension funds that they don't want to see their pensions invested in, say, oil companies that are harming the environment and are causing global warming. But the managers that run these pension funds resort to this fiduciary argument, which they say is legal, that they have only one duty to make sure they invest people's monies to acquire the very best return. So it doesn't matter, according to these pension fund managers, that the workers whose money it actually is, it doesn't matter what they think about it. It doesn't matter about whether they think it should be invested in a different way. So it becomes in the end that it's only the decisions made by these managers that actually counts. The pension holders apparently have no say over these decisions. And as I remember at this time in 2007, the council workers' trade unions were rarely even consulted over investment decisions by pension companies. The managers of these funds present themselves, I think, as specialists who know better than anybody else how to invest. If I remember at that time, I think it was on the Roger Phillips show, there was a number of pension stakeholders, workers basically, who argued that there should be a ballot of all pension holders to see who they might want to see their pension monies invested with. And you know what happened? The pension fund managers came out and said, well, that wouldn't and could never be allowed. So what we're looking at here, Phil, is a huge democratic deficit. There is no democracy applied to the decision-making here, either by the workers themselves, in other words, they can't have a ballot and decide, how they're going to invest their pension monies, or by their trade unions, or even by the local authorities. Don't forget, we had 4 out of 5 local authorities calling on the pension fund to divest. And these people basically came out and said that they weren't going to do it. But let's examine this concept that the pension managers put forward, that investing in the arms trade is really so good, so honky-dory. Well, let's ask the question, is it? You see, when these pension fund managers are questioned about how good these investments in the arms trade are, they kind of actually contradict themselves by saying that they only invest a small amount of money in these arms companies, typically 2 or 3%. Now, when you think about it, if investing in arms companies is so good, well, why don't they just throw all of their money in there? But the reason they don't is simple. It's because the arms trade is actually a very, very murky and unstable business. And for one thing, it's very corrupt. We know, for instance, that British Aerospace Systems used to sell Tornado fighter jets to Saudi Arabia at an inflated price. If I remember at the time, the market value of a Tornado fighter plane was something like £18 million a piece. But BAE Systems was selling it to Saudi Arabia for £1 million more. And why? And it was quite simply because BAE Systems were giving senior officials close to the Saudi royal family £1 million bribe per plane for the continuation of that contract. And this has all been documented on our TV, in basically TV documentaries. It's been also documented in newspapers like The Times, I think The Guardian, and all sorts of important newspapers.
Mark, I believe that Tony Blair was at the centre of all of this, and that there was some kind of criminal investigation going on at the time.
What we're talking about here are allegations of up to £1 billion paid out in bribes by our country's arms companies. It was the subject of the UK and the world's largest corruption investigation carried out by Scotland Yard's Serious Fraud Squad. And only a year before Tony Blair left office, Scotland Yard had brought the case so far forward they were about to arrest senior people in this country over this issue. Now, I won't mention who these, where these individuals worked, I'll leave that for you to guess, and I'll leave that for your listeners to figure out. But anyways, when Saudi Arabia got word of this investigation, the serious fraud squad investigation, they knew that difficult questions were even going to be asked back in Saudi Arabia, because obviously, there was going to be people being arrested in the UK over selling arms to Saudi Arabia. So they knew questions were going to be asked about their leadership. So what happened was the Saudis rang Tony Blair, and Blair cancelled on his own merit. He just cancelled this multi-million-pound investigation by our police force. So here's a question for you. So how fiduciary is it then giving bribes to get arms sales? If investing in arms companies is so lucrative, why did the British government itself subsidise the arms trade? I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Phil, but have you ever heard of the arms export credit guarantee system that the Thatcher government used to offer to help British companies sell arms? I think it's still going, by the way, but it's called something else today. So here's a story for you. Only a few short weeks after Saddam Hussein had gassed the Kurdish people in Halabja, David Mellor, he was an MP, and I think he was working for the Foreign Office or something at the time. He went to Baghdad, and apparently when he met Saddam Hussein, he used to always sit on some fancy chaise lounge, and he went to Baghdad to sell Saddam some more arms. And on Thatcher's say-so, Mellor increased the export credit guarantees to British companies from, I think it was then about £80 million a year, to £320 million a year for Iraq, and that's for Iraq alone. In other words, the taxpayer was going to bankroll, if there was any problems with payment, £320 million worth of arms sales to Iraq. So Saddam went and bought British arms, but the whole thing went pear-shaped when Saddam invaded Kuwait. We and the Americans, of course, then went to war against Saddam. And Saddam's answer to this was that he then refused to pay back the arms companies, our arms companies, for the weapons he had bought of us. So you can imagine then who had to pay the bill. Well, it was the great British taxpayer, wasn't it? So what I'm trying to say here is that the arms business is not as profitable or as straightforward as it sounds. It's pretty dodgy and it's unstable. We also need, I suppose, to look at what kind of world do we want to create with this kind of business. The eminent journalist John Pilger, in his book Flying the Flag, Arming the World, says that Britain is probably the third largest seller of arms to the world. He estimated that in just one 10-year period alone, that the use of British arms by different regimes around the world had caused the deaths of at least 1 million people. Half of China's police force at one time used equipment made in the UK, including electric shock batons. But the real business was generally done with so-called friendly dictators, such as Indonesia's President Suharto, who, when he came to power in the 1960s and 70s, murdered millions of Indonesian socialists and communists. Indeed, this guy was actually a serial killer. In 1975, he invaded the tiny island of East Timor, and over the next few decades, he murdered hundreds of thousands of East Timorese people. And Suharto's military often used BAE Systems Hawk fighter planes to strap and bomb the East Timorese people. Weapons made by us, unfortunately. The United Nations at the time called it genocide. And all this, by the way, was happening under Tony Blair's Labour government. And for some reason, they said it was an ethical foreign policy, which I don't know, how you come across that, but that's what they said. Now, we've already mentioned our dealings with Saddam Hussein and the businesses we did with him. But the real fruit in the pie is probably our arms sales to Saudi Arabia, which has stretched on for well over 30 years. And we have undoubtedly sold them many tens of billions of pounds in arms during this period from Tornado fighter bombers to our latest Typhoon fighter plane. And we are arming Saudi Arabia right now as they drop our cruise missiles and so-called smart bombs on the desperately poor people of the Yemen who are currently suffering a massive famine. Thousands of children are dying, and all we as a country are interested in is selling more dynamite to the Saudis to drop on the poor Yemeni people. So I have to ask you, Phil, is this the kind of world we really want to create? Surely this is not the only show in town, is it? Why can't we direct our industrial might to perhaps building more TVs or radios or washing machines? Why don't we build more planes? But passenger planes, why do we only have to build fighter planes? You see, the corruption that goes alongside the arms trade probably warps us, and I think it makes us evil. It distorts our economy, and it even distorts our thinking. You see, I think we as a people, I think we are better than this. I think we can be better than this. And this is my question. Can we be better than this? And people like Joe Anderson, there's got to be a lot of questions here asked of him. Why on earth is he renting out council property to arms companies?
Well, shortly after that interview with Mark Holt, Liverpool City Council announced that the arms fair had been cancelled. Thousands of people signed a petition and preparations were afoot to demonstrate to prevent the Merchants of Death staging their event. Even the Anglican Bishop of Liverpool wrote to Joe Anderson urging him to cancel the fair. It goes to show what can be done when people join together to fight for justice and peace. I'm sure that many of you will have heard of Bruce Kent. I met him first at a Pax Christi event in the 1970s in London. Born on the 22nd of June 1929, he is a political activist and a laicized Roman Catholic priest. Active in the campaign for nuclear disarmament, he was the organisation's General Secretary from 1980 to 1985 and its chair from 1987 to 1990. He is also a member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Bruce, thanks for coming on the programme. Can you tell me why should people oppose the proposed arms fair in Liverpool?
Because it's part of the military machine. It's a companies making profit out of militarism, and because militarism is not the first resort, it's the last resort in any question of conflict. I think the emphasis is entirely wrong, and I think it should certainly be opposed vigorously.
The building where the arms fair is taking place is owned by Liverpool City Council. Do you think the council has an ethical responsibility to oppose the use of its premises by arms manufacturers?
Certainly. I would have thought that any civic authority, the first priority is the welfare of the people in the area, not promoting arms sales to different countries. I'd be much happier, I'm holding it up now, if they promoted the United Nations Charter and had meetings on the Charter about the abolition of war. The Charter talks about the scourge of war. That's how the Charter starts, the scourge. And to have an arms exhibition is not ending the scourge, it's promoting the scourge. And I think it's quite wrong for a local authority to be doing that, as we say in London, where they're normally in London, and we oppose them every time.
The government uses taxpayers' money to subsidise the arms trade, saying they do it to protect the jobs of workers employed in the industry. Do you think there are greener alternatives for the skills of those workers?
Of course there are. We've only just seen during this COVID crisis the way in which major companies doing all sorts of stupid things can suddenly turn around to making things to protect you against COVID and so on. And it's been a revolution in the industry. And they can do it in a matter of a few months. They turned around. Arms companies, a man who can make bombs can perfectly well make motor cars or make ambulances or something. Why not? So it's an absurd argument. That's all they can do. They can do lots and lots of positive things as well.
Bruce, you've been a lifelong campaigner against the use of nuclear weapons. In fact, I recall reading a pamphlet you wrote on the subject in the 1960s. Do you think the threat of a nuclear catastrophe is greater now than it was then?
It's always higher not because of direct war, though that's possible all the time. The accident risk is enormous, and we have these things which it only takes some idiot to press the wrong button or to get the wrong message before we're into nuclear war. And we've had accident after accident. In 1983, we were saved by one man, Stanislav Petrov, a Soviet forward agent, who refused to obey orders. And if he'd accepted the orders, we probably would have had a nuclear war. But he refused. So the danger continues and gets worse because we are having less nuclear weapons, but much more precise. And why do you need lots of them anyway? There's no necessity. So I think that the abolition of nuclear weapons is an essential feature of stopping militarism. We've now got to such a point when the Pope Francis condemns not just the use, but the possession of nuclear weapons. And I've yet to hear any bishop in this country accepting the Pope's ruling on the possession. We still have the things, and it's high time we got rid of them. And we're spending, I think it's £205 billion on getting more missiles and more nuclear weapons. Absolutely ridiculous. If you've got that money, we should spend it on hospitals and schools and old age pensioners and overseas welfare and those things, not waste it.
Well, we have a lot of pensioners on Merseyside, and the MPA would be delighted to host you at a meeting once the pandemic is over.
Just send a helicopter, will you? I can travel by helicopter anytime.
Great to see you, Bruce. Thanks very much.
Nice to see you anyway. Great pleasure indeed. Great pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thanks for listening today. In our next podcast, we will be covering the health workers campaign for fair pay, which means a 15% pay rise following years of exploitation. This is Phil Maxwell saying stay safe, solidarity, I'll see you soon. And I'm now handing you over to none other than our resident musician pensioner Phil Newton, who, I know, is going to cheer you up with this.
This is the I Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside in F. Do better than that. Sunnyside. I would do like to be beside the seaside again in F.